Hello, and welcome to this simple English story for beginners. Today, I want to tell you a story that changed my life forever. It is a quiet story about a student and his teacher, a story of silent love, deep respect, and something that never got spoken out loud. Have you ever loved someone and kept it to yourself? Have you stayed quiet because you were afraid of what might happen if you spoke? This story is called I Loved My Teacher. It is simple, emotional, and easy to understand for anyone learning English. Let's listen together. Let your heart feel each word, and let your English grow with every line. Now, let's begin. My name is Daniel, and I was 19 years old when this story happened. I had just started my first year at university. The university was in a small, quiet town. I lived in a student dormitory with two other boys who liked sports more than studying. I was not like them. I liked books, music, and long walks alone. I liked thinking more than talking. I was a quiet person. English was my favorite subject, but I was not good at speaking. I understood grammar, but I could not speak well in class. Every time the teacher asked a question, I looked down. My heart beat fast, and my mouth felt dry. I was too shy to speak. Then one morning, something changed. We had a new English teacher. Her name was Miss Emily, and she was unlike any teacher before. She walked into the room with a bright smile and a warm voice. She said, "Good morning, everyone. My name is Miss Emily." She looked young, maybe in her late 20s. Her clothes were simple, but her eyes were full of light. She made the room feel calm. On the first day, she told us, "Do not worry about mistakes. Mistakes mean you are learning. Be brave, speak out loud." I had never heard a teacher say that before. Most teachers cared about rules and tests. Miss Emily cared about how we felt. She asked us to write about our dreams. I wrote that I wanted to speak English with confidence. I did not know if I could. After class, she came to me and said, "Daniel, your writing is beautiful. Your words are honest. You just need to speak them, too." I felt surprised. No one had said something like that to me before. I felt like she really saw me, not just a student, but a person. From that day, I started to look forward to her class. I came early and sat in the third row instead of the back. It felt new to me. Miss Emily talked about English like it was a living thing. She said, "Words are alive. They carry your feelings. Let them walk with you." Sometimes she read stories to us. Her voice made each word soft, like music. I listened with my whole heart, not just my ears. I began to speak more in class. Small sentences at first, then longer ones. When she smiled at me, I felt proud and safe. She gave me good feedback on my homework. She said, "You have a gentle way with words. Keep writing. Keep sharing." I started to believe I could get better, not only in English, but in other parts of life too. Her words gave me strength. One day after class, she asked me, "Daniel, how are you today?" I was not ready for that question. I said, "I am okay, just quiet." She laughed softly and said, "That's okay. Quiet people often have the loudest hearts." I did not forget those words. I began to think about her outside of class. When I saw her walking on campus, I wanted to say hi, but I just smiled and looked down. Sometimes I wrote poems in English and kept them in my notebook. I never showed her, but they were all about her. At night, I could not sleep. I thought about her smile, her voice, the way she looked at the class when she told stories. I told myself, this is not love, it's just admiration. But deep inside, I knew it was more than that. She was my teacher, and I was her student. There was a line I could not cross, and I knew it, but I could not stop my feelings. I watched her talk to other students with kindness, especially Leo, the boy who always made jokes and made her laugh. Every time she laughed at his jokes, my heart felt heavy. I wished she would laugh like that with me. I began to feel confused. I wanted to be closer to her, but I also felt I should stay away. It was hard to be near and not be seen. But even in silence, I kept learning. I learned new words and used them to describe feelings I had no name for. She taught us about past tense one day and said, "We use the past to talk about things that still live in our hearts." That sentence stayed in my mind. I wrote it down and stared at it. I felt like she was talking to me, only me. I started to dress better before class. I combed my hair and wore my cleanest shirt. I wanted her to notice. But she never said anything. I did not blame her. She was doing her job. She was always professional. It was me who was lost in feelings I could not share. Still, I came to every class with hope. Maybe today, she would look at me longer. Maybe today, she would ask how I really felt. But she never did, and I never told her. My feelings stayed hidden, like a secret poem only I could read. It was the middle of the semester. The air was getting cold, and the trees outside the classroom were turning yellow and red. Miss Emily wore scarves now, long, soft scarves with simple patterns. They moved when she walked, and I could not stop watching her. One day, she came to class with a quiet face. Her smile was still there, but it was slower. Her voice was still warm, but lower. At the end of class, she said something I did not expect. "Everyone, I need to tell you something. Please listen." We all stopped packing our bags. She stood near the desk, holding her papers close to her chest. Her eyes were gentle but sad. She said, "My contract here is only for 1 semester. I will finish my work in 2 months. Then, I will return to my city." The room went silent. No one spoke. I looked around and saw confused faces. My chest felt tight. I could not believe it. She smiled and added, "Let's make the most of our time together. You have all been wonderful students. I am proud of your progress." After class, some students came to talk to her. They asked questions. Some looked sad. I stood near the door and watched quietly. Leo was the first to go up to her. He gave her a small chocolate and said, "You can't leave. You are our best teacher." She laughed and thanked him. I felt something strange in my stomach. It was not pain, but it was not comfortable either. I walked away before she could see me. I did not want to be part of the crowd. I needed time to think alone. That night, I could not sleep. I kept hearing her voice in my head. "I will leave in 2 months." 2 months. Only 8 more weeks. I wanted to do something, say something, but I had no plan. Just feelings. Too many feelings. All inside. All without words. In class, she taught as always, kind, focused, full of passion. But I noticed something new sometimes. She stared out the window. Maybe she was thinking about her next life, her home, a new job, new students. I was not in that future, and it hurt to realize that. One morning, I saw her talking with Leo outside the classroom. They were laughing about something. She touched his arm lightly. It was just a friendly gesture, a normal moment, but to me, it felt like something heavy falling on my chest. I turned around and walked away. I did not want to see more. I told myself, "Does not matter. She is just your teacher." But it did matter. I began to avoid eye contact in class. I looked at my notebook more. I spoke less. My answers were short and dry. She noticed. One day, she asked me after class, "Daniel, is everything okay? You seem a little quiet lately." I wanted to say, "No, I am not okay. I do not want you to leave. I care about you." But instead, I just nodded and said, "I'm fine." She looked at me for a second. I thought she wanted to say more, but she didn't. She just smiled gently and said, "All right, take care." The words, "take care," stayed with me. It felt like goodbye, even though we still had time left. Every day became shorter in my mind. I counted the weeks, then the days. I knew each class was one step closer to the end. I wanted to slow down time, but I could not. I wrote her name in my notebook again and again. I wrote Emily, Miss Emily, my teacher, my secret. Sometimes I looked at her and imagined a different world, a world where I was not her student. Maybe we could meet in a cafe. Maybe we could talk about books, life, music. Maybe she would smile at me, not as a teacher, but as a woman. But that world was not real. This world had rules. And the biggest rule was this: a student must not love his teacher. Still, my heart did not understand rules. It only understood moments. Her voice, her eyes, the way she looked when she listened. I started to write a letter, not to give her, just for myself. I wrote, "I do not know what this feeling is, but it is true." I kept the letter in my drawer. Every night, I read it. I added more. My feelings grew, and the pages grew too. Sometimes I felt foolish. How could I feel so deeply for someone I barely knew outside of class? But my heart said, "This is real." I wanted to stop thinking about her, but she was in everything. Every lesson, every sentence, every quiet moment of the day. One evening, I saw her at the bookstore near campus. She was looking at a poetry book. I stood behind a shelf and watched her. She smiled while reading. Then she put the book down and left. I wanted to run after her and say something, but my legs did not move. The next day, she told the class we would write personal stories for our final project. She said, "Write from the heart. Be honest." That night, I started writing a story. It was about a boy who loved someone in silence, someone who changed his life forever. The boy in the story did not get the girl, but he became someone stronger because of that love. That story was mine. I did not write her name, but every word was for her. Every sentence held the truth I could never say out loud. I knew the day would come soon, the last day, the final class, and I had to decide: tell her something or stay silent forever. The last 3 weeks passed quickly. I tried to enjoy each class, but my heart was heavy. Every moment felt both sweet and sad. I watched her explain grammar with passion. I watched her smile at Leo's jokes. I watched her write words on the board slowly. Everything she did became special in my eyes. Even simple things like handing out papers or closing her book meant something to me. But I also felt pain. I knew she was leaving. I knew my feelings had no place, and I could not find peace in my heart. At night, I sat by the window in my dorm room. The streets were quiet. My mind was loud. I thought about her voice and her goodbye. I held my letter in my hands. It had grown to 5 pages. I wrote about her eyes, her kindness, and the way she made me believe. But I never planned to give it to her. It was my secret, a place where my love could live quietly, without hurting anyone. One evening, I saw Leo again with her outside the library. They were standing close. She was laughing. He was looking into her eyes. A deep, sharp feeling went through my chest. I turned and walked away. I could not watch. I felt angry, but not at them, at myself. Why did I let this happen? Why did I fall for someone I could never have? I felt foolish, like a child dreaming an impossible dream. I stopped coming early to class. I stopped sitting near the front. I tried to build a wall between me and my feelings. Miss Emily noticed. After one class, she walked over and said softly, "Daniel, you have been quiet lately. Is something wrong?" I wanted to cry. I wanted to tell her everything, but I looked down and said, "I'm just tired. That's all." She looked at me for a few seconds. Then she said, "Take care of yourself. Your words matter. Don't let them disappear." That night, I read her words again in my mind. Your words matter. It hurt, because I had so many words, but I could not say them. I stopped writing the letter. I stopped writing poems. I thought maybe I needed to forget. Maybe it was time to move on. But forgetting her felt like erasing color from my world. Without her, everything felt gray. My heart was full, but my hands were empty. I wanted to hold on, but I also wanted to let go. The two feelings pulled me apart. In our final writing class, she gave each student personal feedback. She wrote on our papers with blue pen and soft words. When she gave me mine, she looked into my eyes and said, "Daniel, your story was beautiful. Thank you for writing it." I opened the paper later. She had written, "Your heart is kind. Never stop sharing it with the world." I closed my eyes and breathed. That night, I cried for the first time, not loudly, but quietly, with my face on my pillow. I did not know why it hurt so much. I think it was because I never said anything, and maybe I never would. One day before the last class, I saw her walking alone on the small bridge near campus. I stood behind a tree and watched her. She was looking at the water below. The wind moved her scarf gently. I wanted to walk up and say something, anything, but I did not. I stayed there, watching from far away. My feet felt frozen. My chest felt too full to speak. In my dreams, I told her. I said, "Miss Emily, I love you. I know it's not right, but it's true." In my dreams, she smiled and touched my face. She said, "I know, Daniel, I always knew, but dreams are not real." The next day was the last class. Everyone brought small gifts, flowers, chocolates, letters. I brought nothing, just my silence. She smiled at each student. She hugged the girls, shook hands with the boys. She said kind words to everyone. When it was my turn, I stood there with nothing to give. She looked at me and said, "Thank you, Daniel. You were a quiet light." I smiled and nodded. I wanted to say, "You were the one who made me shine," but the words stayed in my throat. We all took a photo together. I stood on the side, a little behind. My smile was soft, my eyes a little sad. After the class, she walked away with Leo. They laughed as they walked down the stairs. I stayed alone in the room. I sat at her desk and looked around. The whiteboard still had her writing on it. "Be brave with your words." I stared at it. I opened my notebook. The letter was still there. I held it in my hands and closed my eyes. My heart was shaking. I walked to the teacher's desk, put the letter under a small pile of papers, and left the room. Outside, the wind was cold. I zipped up my jacket and walked slowly toward the dorm. My chest felt lighter, but also empty. I did not know if she would read it. I did not know what she would think. But I had to let it go. I had to let her go. That night, I did not dream. I slept deeply. Maybe my heart was tired. Maybe it was healing. The next morning, I woke up early. The sky was cloudy. My room was quiet. I remembered the letter. I remembered her eyes. I did not know if she found it. I did not know if she read it. A part of me hoped she didn't. A part of me prayed she did. At school, her classroom was empty. The chairs were all in a circle. A soft smell of her perfume still stayed in the air. On the teacher's desk, there was a small paper, just one sentence written on it. Thank you for being part of my journey. I stood there alone, looking at the words. I wanted more. I wanted answers. But all I had was a sentence and a memory. I walked outside. The trees were quiet. The wind was soft. I saw her near the campus gate, standing beside her suitcase. She was talking to someone on the phone. She looked peaceful. She looked ready. She was saying goodbye in her own quiet way. I stood far away. My legs wanted to move. My heart said, go, say something. This is your last chance. I walked slowly toward her. Each step felt like a question. Each breath felt like a choice. I was afraid, but I kept walking. She ended her call and looked up. Our eyes met. She smiled, surprised but calm. Daniel, she said, you came? I nodded. I could not speak yet. My throat was dry. My hands were shaking, but I had no more time to wait. I wrote you something. I said, I don't know if you read it. Her eyes became softer. She did not look away. She said, I did. Last night, that was all. Just those words. But they made my heart stop. My legs almost gave out. We stood in silence. It was not heavy. It was quiet, gentle, like rain that falls without sound. She was waiting for me to speak. I'm sorry, I said. I know it was not right. I didn't plan to feel that way. I just couldn't stop it. She looked at me with kindness. She said, you don't need to say sorry. Feelings are not wrong. They just happen. I looked down. I didn't want to make things hard for you. I just wanted you to know that you helped me more than anyone. She stepped closer. Her voice was soft. Daniel, you're a good young man. You have a kind heart. Never lose that. I asked her, did you ever think about me? Even a little. My voice was quiet. I almost didn't want to hear her answer. She smiled sadly. I thought you were special. I saw something in you. But I had to be your teacher, not your friend. I nodded. I understood. My heart still hurt, but I understood. She was honest. That honesty was more beautiful than any lie. She reached into her bag and pulled out a book. It was the poetry book I saw her holding in the bookstore. She gave it to me and said, there's a poem in here I want you to read. It reminded me of you. I held the book like it was made of glass. I looked at her. Thank you, I said. My voice was calm, but my chest was full of storms. She looked at the road. A car was coming. Her ride. She turned back to me and said, take care, Daniel. Keep writing. She hugged me just once, a short hug with both arms. I closed my eyes and let the moment stay in my memory. Then she stepped away, picked up her suitcase, and walked toward the car. I watched her get in. I didn't move. The car drove away slowly. She looked back once. Our eyes met one last time through the window. Then she disappeared. I stood there for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just stood and let the goodbye settle into my bones. That night, I opened the poetry book. Inside the front cover, she had written, "To Daniel, words are your gift. Never stop using them." I turned to the poem she marked. It was simple. It said, "Some people come into our lives not to stay, but to change us forever." I read the poem again and again. I held the book close to my chest. I smiled and cried at the same time. She was gone. My secret was no longer a secret, and the pain in my heart was real, but it was clean. It was honest. I realized I had done the hardest thing, told the truth, and I didn't regret it. Even if it changed nothing, it changed me. For days after, the classroom felt empty, but slowly, I found new energy. I started writing again. I started reading more. Leo once asked me, "Did you talk to Miss Emily before she left?" I nodded, just to say goodbye. I answered. He smiled. "She said you were her most thoughtful student." I looked at him and said, "She taught me how to think." Later, I walked to the bridge where I once saw her. I stood there and watched the water. It moved slowly, like time. I took the book out of my bag and opened it. The wind touched the pages. I read one line and whispered it to the sky. She came, she taught, she left, and I stayed, and somehow that was enough. 1 year later, I stood in front of a small classroom. The windows were open, the air smelled like chalk and new books. I was now a teaching assistant. I helped younger students with their English. I walked around, answered questions, and listened. It was strange at first to stand where my teachers once stood, but slowly, it felt right. I felt calm, like I was where I belonged. Some students were shy, like I used to be. I saw myself in them. I remembered how scared I felt to say even one English word. One girl looked down at her paper and whispered, "I can't do this." I smiled and said, "It's okay to be quiet." Quiet people feel deeply. She looked up and smiled a little. That moment reminded me of Miss Emily, of the first time she saw me, not just as a student. I had not seen her again. No letters, no emails, just the memory of her voice, her words, and her soft goodbye. I still had the poetry book. I kept it on my desk. When I felt lost, I read the note she wrote. "Words are your gift." Sometimes I wondered where she was. Maybe she was teaching in another city, helping new students find their voices. I hoped she was happy. I hoped someone looked at her the way I once did, with quiet love, full of respect and wonder. I never told anyone else about my letter. It stayed between me and her, between the silence and the wind. I still wrote poems. They were softer now, not sad, but calm. I wrote about growth, about change, and about people who passed through us. One poem said, "You do not have to stay to be remembered. Sometimes, goodbye is the gift." That poem was for her. On some evenings, I walked to the bridge, the same bridge where I once watched her from a distance. Now I walked slower, with peace in my steps. I no longer waited for someone to appear. I simply looked at the water and breathed. Sometimes, I brought my notebook and wrote under the trees. The wind would turn the pages for me. It felt like she was still near. I learned that love does not always mean holding on. Sometimes, love means letting go with grace and quiet strength. I loved my teacher. That will always be true. But now, I love the person I became because of her. She gave me more than English lessons. She gave me courage, voice, and a way to believe in myself. And that kind of love, silent, respectful, deep, is not something to regret. It is something to be thankful for. When I tell this story, I do not feel pain. I feel light. I feel memory. I feel a part of her still lives in my words. I once thought saying goodbye would break me, but it didn't. It shaped me. It helped me grow. Now I help others grow. And maybe, one day, someone will say, because of Daniel, I learned to speak. And that will be enough. That will be my way of continuing what she gave me. A gift passed from heart to heart. One day, I found a letter in my drawer, the old one I never planned to give. I read it one last time. I smiled, I folded it, and I let the wind take it away. It flew through the air and disappeared above the trees. That was the end of my secret and the beginning of something new. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and share. See you in the next video.